I mean, I love art. It's a great face mask. Yeah. I was thinking, yeah, the VCs, when I think of first when my company's in, they're like, you want to come in, and I'm like, I mean, overcapitalized.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to Reach, brought to you by TechZulu and GadgetReview. My name is Scot Rubin, and I am here to talk about kind of the future of gaming. And I've been covering video games since 1995, when everything was about the end cap and where you were in a CompUSA or an electronic boutique. And we've come a long way now. The software store is in your pocket, and everyone here on this panel will have something to say about where we are today and where the future is going to be for game sales and game publishing. With us tonight is Josh Yguado from SGN. He's the president of SGN. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
Chris Hewish, who is head of Global Interactive for Dreamworks Animation. And he's obviously got some experience in the IP and licensing side of things. And then we have Wilson Kriegel, who is the president and chief operating officer of Paltalk. But a lot of people will know that he was formerly the CRO, chief revenue officer of Zynga and OMGPOP. Thank you for coming by. And finally, we have Robin Kaminsky. She is the CEO at First Street Partners, formerly the EVP of Publishing, executive lead global gaming for Activision Blizzard. Thank you. So everyone here is kind of in this amazing spot in time right now. Gaming has evolved so rapidly just over the past 5 years. Everyone has a phone in their pocket, and that phone is essentially a software store. And so, the biggest question I have as someone who grew up playing my Odyssey and my Atari all the way up to the Xbox and Xbox 360 is, how has the development cycle changed for a game? You lock these guys away for a couple of years and come out and they've got a title, and then before the connected console, it was all about get it out. There weren't any patches. You had to have a game and it had to go. And then that was kind of it. You took your hands off. We'll start with you, Josh. What is it like now where not only can your game be patched, but you can tweak it almost hourly if you wanted to? What's it like for your developers?
Yeah, for us, the development cycle never stops. So typically, instead of, like you said, spending 2 years on a game like you would on a console, we're making mobile and social games. So games you play on an iPhone or an iPad or on Facebook. And all our games, the typical cycle is 6 to 9 months. And then once the game gets out, the development process, you're sort of off to the races. And often, once the game is released to the public, that's when you actually add developers to it, because every week, every month, you're adding new content, you're adding new versions of the game, you're tweaking levels. Development, you'll have a whole team that are designing new sections of the game. The gaming industry as a whole, I'd say at least in the mobile and social realm, has changed completely over the last 2 years. And games, and Chris, we talked about this a little bit, games are services now. And so a game we launch one day, a year later, will be a completely different game just because we've really refined it and focused on what users want.
And Chris, if it's a case where, once the game is out, it's not really done, how do you decide when to ship? Or you don't even ship anymore. How do you decide when to let it out into the wild if every day is another day you could be working on it, or another day it could be out in beta, so to speak?
I think you have to be very, very disciplined in your approach. One of the big changes from the large console developments to the mobile, sort of smaller, more iterative games is just a real focus on less. Sort of less is more. Focus on what the core gameplay is, what the core fantasy is, get that mechanic done right, and then launch it and get it out into the world. And like Josh said, once it's out and live, you can really then chase what's working, expand upon it from there. So the big difference from when I was doing a lot of the packaged goods console development to the digital is on the packaged goods side, you really needed a big blueprint of every single feature that was going in the game, and you had to have big teams working on that. It had to be perfect before you launched. But now it's much more focused, much more iterative, and a lot of that heavy lifting happens post-launch. So I think not being afraid to pursue that kind of model is critical.
I would say, though, that if you look at the Facebook platform, which has now been out 4 or 5 years on the game development cycle-wise, as well as now smartphones, probably for a good 2.5 years, you know, in 2008, you could launch a Facebook game for 20 grand with 3 people, and you could do that in 2 months. You know, you turn the clock 3 years later, you're dealing with $500,000, $1 million budgets, and 30 to 100 people developing games. You know, so the reality is when the new platforms come out, whether it's Ouya or mobile devices, and new software and technologies come out to support these, you can get a rush to developing content and getting first mover advantage, and quality isn't everything. But ultimately, over time, quality is really critical, and your MVP, your minimum viable product, is not exactly the same than it was 3 years before. And if you look at the development cycles, even mobile, I mean, mobiles in the early days, you could release a product within 2 months and you could have market share. Today you release products, they have to be competitive out of the gate, even if we're still doing a services as content as a business model and we're still iterating. You still have to deliver a 6-month development cycles. You still have to have 15 to 20 engineers. Your cost cycles are different, and you can't afford having a game that goes to market that ultimately can't compete out of the gate. So, in even today's environment, the cycles and the costs and the resources have changed, even if we continue doing it as a service.
I want to reinforce that. I mean, I think that part of the challenge is regardless of the platform you look like, games are becoming more expensive. They're taking longer to get out. There are still games that can come out in 6 to 9 months, but I'll give you an example. There's a company called Machine Zone. They launched a game called Game of War across most of the world just in the last 2 months. They're a top 5 grossing game right now. Okay, that game took closer to 2 years to make. That game did not take $1 million to make, but the quality of the game shows, and it starts to step up what's required on each platform. Now, it didn't come close to the cost or the time it took to make Grand Theft Auto, right? But Grand Theft Auto also delivered revenue of $1 billion in 24 hours. So, I mean, what you're seeing is the value of those games are increasing across, regardless of platform. The games that came out that were 2 months and 1 month and 3 people, they had a certain value because the platform was new. As those platforms mature, the costs mature, and each platform has a different value attached to it and a different amount of time and cost and risk that goes into making it.
When we look at what traditionally happened in the console business, where games got better with more fidelity, more graphics, so we were talking how developers had to get more artists and get more programmers and add sound design, and the games just got increasingly more expensive. It was kind of refreshing when mobile started to take off, where you didn't need to have 100 artists, you didn't need to have these huge CG effects. You could make core gameplay that was addictive, but as the mobile devices get more powerful, are we going to see that race, to the arms race, so to speak, to create these fidelity games on mobile that can give you a AAA title type experience? Are you going to see those budgets start to go again in that kind of hockey stick?
I think there's a very real possibility of that, especially as you see the industry mature. You wonder, are we going to see some consolidation? Are you going to see some of the same trends that we saw in the console space, where leaders in the field can maintain their position by outspending newer companies? I think that could be a scenario that leads to exactly what you're talking about, where as the technology improves and people can afford to spend more on better experiences, that will start to separate sort of the leaders in the pack from a lot of the startups. The one difference, though, from the console space is we don't have the first-party licensing fees that you used to have on console, which was a real prohibitor to a lot of people entering the field, where you had to spend millions of dollars up front to Microsoft and Sony just to get on shelves. So that's one, I think, thing that could keep it from going down that same road.
But you actually, Josh, you don't think that you'll need to maybe get into that arms race, because the games you're creating aren't necessarily for people who want gorgeous 3D graphics. They want something fun for a little bit of time that gives them an experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a slightly different take on it than some of you guys. I do think costs and production quality is going up, but I think there's ways to de-risk the production process. So for instance, we've got an online and Facebook casual game platform called MindJolt. It has about 2,000 small casual games, and we'll put 2 to 3 new games out every week. And these are very basic games that we spent 2 to 3 weeks on each one, And the platform does very well and has millions and millions of players, but we can see very quickly which mechanics people love, what they don't love, what parts of it they like. We can tweak them. So before we're actually going into development on a game, we know users love the mechanic. We already know how to tune it and make it sort of optimal, and we know what users are willing to spend on. So I think even before you go into the development process, you can de-risk your strategy to a certain extent by finding game mechanics people love. And then the second thing I'll say is that if you look at the top grossing list right now, there's a mix. And there are games that are, very, very high production quality and very deep. But many of those games that do have very high budgets, the Infinity Blade type of games, don't always monetize the best. And the game that's been at the top of the list right now for the last, 3 months has been Candy Crush, which started out with 60 levels and was a very basic match 3 game, and it captured people's imagination, and it was a very high quality puzzle game. And they probably, I don't know exactly, but it probably took them 6 months to develop that game.
I mean, I think that's an important point. It's not whether it's a arms rush to quality, to how much the budgets are to building AAA titles. It's the fact that you have various categories of genres of games that people will play in different manners on different platforms, right? So casual has always been popular on mobile, even the old handset, devices. I mean, a game that's been popular over the past 6 months has been Dots, right? And it's like, how basic of a game can you create? But yet, how do you entertain yourself on each individual device? I mean, this is an entertainment industry. It's a content industry. When you're on an Xbox, you want a certain type of experience, but Xbox Live has a lot of casual games. It has a lot of very core games, a lot of AAA titles. So I think it's more around which verticals are you competing in, and accordingly, the level of risk or level of investments will vary as well as the expectations.
Also, what defines quality matters, right? So in a free-to-play game, it is as important to build the economy and how people are going to spend money and why they should be addicted to spending money and what are the social features that engage their emotions in a way that in console games it simply wasn't that important.
When you look at the way these kind of casual games have exploded, not just in the user base, but in the revenue through microtransactions, who is the key gamer demographic now? When you all sit there in your meetings and your marketing meetings, say, okay, we've got to make a game for this group. Is it 40-year-old moms? Is it 16-year-old boys? Who is the most valuable gaming demographic to each of them?
I don't think it's as transparent as it was a decade ago. I actually think everybody's a gamer from the age of 4 years old now, from your tablet users to educational games, all the way to the first generations of PlayStation users who are probably like 45 years old now. And I think because the platforms have enabled for experiences to take place in the subway, while you're at home, with other people, the ability and globally, Japan, Korea, China are huge gaming markets, are actually much bigger than the American market. So I think that it's a global industry. It's all ages, all genders, and that's also one of the reasons why the industry never stops booming. This is one of the few industries that we've been privileged to be in that has never stopped growing over the past 15 years, regardless of the economy, because we're delivering entertainment, and people will always pay for quality and entertainment.
So how do you decide? I'm sure each of you have experience with targeting specific demographic, but Josh, we'll start with you. How do you decide who's the most valuable? Is it who's downloading the most that month on iOS? Is it who's spending the most in microtransactions across all? How do you make that decision?
So, first of all, I just want to echo Wilson's point that there's been a democratization of who you consider a gamer over the last 10 years that's completely changed the industry.
Much to the dismay of 16 to 25-year-old guys.
Right, exactly. They're competing now against grandmothers and against kids, and everyone's playing together. And I used the example before of Candy Crush. We have a game called Panda Jam, which, there's every demographic. It's kids, it's adults, it's men, it's women. And for us, we're targeting people, or we're trying to make a great game for people that love puzzle games, are willing to pay for additional content, and are able to help us make our game profitable. So I'd say maybe it's more of a psychographic than a demographic. And that's for the majority of our games. We also have, for instance, we have a game called Bingo Blingo. There's a certain demographic that does love bingo, I'll admit that. And it's female, it's a little older skewing, and that's great for us too. So we don't tie ourselves to any one demographic necessarily across all our games. Every game we make, though, we want to make sure it cross-promotes and the same type of users will want to play it as our other games. So anytime we launch a game, there's a huge base that we can throw at the game and start giving it momentum right from the start.
Yeah, I think very similar to what both of you have said, I get this question all the time at Dreamworks, what's the demographic? What's the demographic? Because entertainment companies are all about demographics. And I always counter back, I'm not looking at an age demographic, I'm looking at a behavioral demographic. Are we either going after a casual gamer or a core gamer? I mean, now you have mid-core in there, whether you believe in that or not. But we really target casual gamers, and we try to make sure that there's enough depth in there to also appeal to some core gamers, just to try to maximize our chances to get some revenue, even though for us, it really is about as broad of an audience as we can reach.
But with doing casual gaming, just a few years ago, that was Farmville. That was what you thought of when you thought casual gaming. Are there people in the industry that had their heads so down into what they were doing that they kind of have missed this revolution? You've been around a long time. Well, all of you have. Have you seen people who were once at the top of the game, video game publishing and console and PC publishing, that literally missed the boat here and are wondering what the heck happened?
I think probably, we've all been at AAA companies and when we should perform. I mean, everybody at some point missed the boat. I think, it's a cyclical industry. It's a cyclical content business, and platforms have changed drastically. I think one of the other part of the development cycles is there are so many new technologies that if you spent 2 or 3 years building a product, you're probably missing out on the fact that somebody's actually using a new platform or a new technology, and using that content. You can claim Zynga missed the mobile industry. I mean, it's hearsay because if you have 30 million monthly active users, did you really miss out? Well, maybe it's not generating $1.5 billion like your other business, is. So I think it's more about the media and the press, creating the spin that they want. The fact is, casual core. That it goes back to the psychology of gaming. I think you have casual game players. Like you can play a core game in a casual manner, and you can play a casual game as a core gamer. That's just a behavioral pattern around people were addicted to Farmville. Like you could call them really core gamers. I mean, people who are on Farmville for 10 hours a day, are they core or are they casual? That's a core gamer to me. And then you've got the World of Warcraft guy who's spending 28 hours, a week or whatever in his basement playing World of Warcraft, and that's also a core gamer. I've been in the industry for 14 years, 5 startups. I barely play games. So, I'm considered a casual gamer. When we did draw something at OMGPOP, I don't think there was a demographic that didn't, interact with our product, whether it was a grandmother or a kid or, somebody in the Middle East or whatever it may be. You had guys who were extremely passionate, who spent a lot of time playing the game and had a lot of gameplays. They were core, and then you had guys, probably like me, who are incompetent at drawing and don't spend any time playing, and had 2 exchanges every week. So I think it goes back to the point, which is monetization. And we don't look at a demographic and say, oh, I got to capture that segment and say those are the guys that are going to pay for me. You're building content and aspiring to the notion that the social components, the proliferation of the platforms, the ability to distribute your content allows you to have a potentially scalable product that a lot of people will pay for, and freemium has really enabled for that, which is now content, even quality content, is accessible, free, and now people get to get addicted or get engaged prior to having spent $60 out of the gate. And that was a major hindrance, I think, to scalability of the console industry at first.
Yeah, I mean, how many people in the 80s and 90s might have been gamers if they had ever stepped foot inside a computer software store or a video game store? It just wasn't accessible to. Talking a little bit about Draw Something, which is a huge phenomenon. My mother and I, she's on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast. That was a way that we connected and interacted with each other playing that game. How much of your company and all of your companies looked at that and went, that's Pictionary, And it's nothing more than Pictionary. Let's go into the closet and find every old game there is and just remake it with a digital spin. I mean, that's essentially what Draw Something was, right?
So interestingly, I mean, we did Draw Something on the web as a live gameplay multiplayer, and then we did it on Facebook because Zuckerberg's girlfriend actually played it on the web and was very addicted, and Facebook wanted for live interactions. I thought that could be more viral. It wasn't extremely successful because there was no reason to come back, right? I mean, one of the things that we do try to create, whether or not you build a franchise, is a mechanic or an intent for you to come back and have a reason to come back. When you deal with live gameplay or multiplayer games that don't have leveling curves or don't have storylines, giving people a reason to come back is much harder. When you're dealing with an FPS game, or you're dealing with Lord of the Ring, or you're creating a social mechanic game where you have leveling curves, or you're playing with other people, that social component, or that addiction, or that reasoning is really important. The fact is, yes, it was Pictionary, but there were actually 5 other games that tried to recreate Pictionary on mobile and Facebook who failed.
What was the secret sauce?
Well, we did 30 plus games before we ever got to Draw Something on mobile, so that helps. Most of them were not extremely successful, so that also helps. Failure helps to success. I think is that we took a couple of things. One is, it was a very large market in terms of size of the audience potential. It was, a cooperative play. It was, even though it became slightly competitive over time, it was, Dan, who ran the company with me, he always had the notion of tossing the ball, is how he explained it. And everybody likes to toss the ball in one way, shape, or form without being overly competitive about it, but it can be entertaining. We simplify the mechanics to remove leaderboards and this notion of having to win or lose, and then we ensure that ultimately people could utilize the device in a way that was interactive and fun in how smartphones can be today. And then we had social tools and features around that for proliferating the content. And at first, when we launched, the biggest viral component to our game was actually people going and posting on all other other web properties to actually get other people to come and play the game with them, because we didn't have Facebook Connect. We put Facebook Connect 4 or 5 months after the game was launched, and so people proactively went out there and put their gamer tag names and try to invite people to come into the gameplay. And then celebrities started playing the game and posting on Twitter, and so when you have celebrities that have millions of followers, they started like, I'm playing this game, so all the followers jump in. And we had both an open graph and a closed graph within the game, so you could play with people you didn't know and you could play with your friends. And the combination of all those things made for us to go to 25 million daily active users within 3 months.
Now, in the old days, you could see a first-person shooter and create a similar first-person shooter and get it out the door, but there was a lot of cost and a lot of risk associated with that. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to take a concept that's already out there and skin your own version of it and copy the engine, especially when you can just push it out digitally. How much do you have to fight that urge to just copycat something that's already successful and say, well, we can do it a little bit better and make it more successful? Josh?
Well, if you look at the top grossings, particularly if you're talking about mobile as opposed to PC, free to play, most of it is slightly better versions of something that's been done before. I'm not going to say all of it is, but even Candy Crush, it's not like nobody's done very pretty 3 matching games. That's exactly right, with huge audiences, right? And so the reality is, I think the key to that is, what are you doing that's better? Why would somebody try it? Cost of acquisition is going up. It is harder to get players more involved, regardless of the platform you're on right now. And so you've got to do something that ignites the imagination, whether it's graphics. I mean, fidelity is not a thing that keeps people playing. It is a thing that allows you to help with your cost of acquisition, right? That's what Infinity Blade did. Infinity Blade was so pretty, people tried it. Doesn't keep people playing, it doesn't get people to spend money, it gets people to try the game. But the key to the core question you're asking, which is why not just copycat, is you've got to have something that makes why people would want to play that. But look at the top grossing, there's not that much that's really, really new anymore.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that I agree with you, actually, that any of the most successful games right now, certainly almost every game takes something from other games, but you can't just clone a game and expect it to be a success. We're in an environment now where people aren't paying upfront for a game. You can't trick users. People are getting into the game for free, and they're only going to pull out their wallets if they love it and if they think there's a value to paying something more. So if they're already getting what your game provides somewhere else, or they already paid for it somewhere else, there's no need to pay. And this is one of the best things about free to play, is I really honestly feel like, we got to walk the walk, and we got to create a great game, or else people are going to pick it up, check it out, yeah, that's great, and walk away. Like, they've got to love it enough that they're willing to put their hard-earned money into it. And we got to work our butts off trying to make great products and innovative products that up the game from a competitive perspective, and that means creating something unique and creative.
Are we going to get to a point where publishers are too afraid to make a game that doesn't have a possibility to buy something to get you that revenue stream? In other words, are we past the point where a game can just be fun if it doesn't make you a continual micro revenue stream? It feels like for some companies that's their business, but I feel like at some point, are we going to lose narrative games, for example, if there's no way to sell, or like as EA does, just figure out a way to sell little components of the game?
So can I ask a question? Do you mean you're going to see free-to-play games that don't care how they monetize, or games at all?
Paid games that
Well,
pay $5.99,
I think
$4.99.
you mean, paid games. I think that business, personally, I'd be interested in everybody else's opinion. I think that business is going to go away. I do. I don't see there's a future when the quality of the games in free-to-play continue to increase.
Isn't there a depth of gameplay, though, that people, or at least traditional gamers, have come to expect? Because for a lot of people who play on consoles, there's no expectation of having to buy elements of the game in order to propel yourself. Certainly they've done it with Battlefield and other games where you can buy weapons to increase your ability, but it seems like we may be losing that opportunity to just play without having to be constantly, I'm never going to get far if I don't spend this kind of money.
I'm going to say something that supports Dreamworks. I believe that quality still matters, and franchises do matters, and the ability to know with a certain level of certainty as a consumer when you're playing, Grand Theft Auto, or you're playing Madden, or you're playing, people pay, and there's a reasons for that. Same way you do pay for music, even though there's a lot of free music. The reason why you do pay for editorial, even though there's a lot of free editorial. I do think there's still a market for it. There's no doubt that it's diminished in terms of the rate at which it's growing, but the audience of the market has also grown, and the platforms have also grown. And so I think there's a bigger market with more distribution and more users, paying in various formats for that. But I don't think that DreamWorks have to give away a AAA franchise that somebody paid $15 at the movies and give that away for free on the console or the PC when they can sell it for $49, and a parent may buy it for a kid or a passionate follower or fan or somebody who really loved the movie is going to pay $49 for it. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily going away. I think it's more around how they're getting it that changes over time.
Can I just add one thing, though? The assumption that you're making is that all free-to-play forces you to pay in order to move forward. I'd argue one of the most successful free-to-play games in the world does not do that, which is League of Legends. Okay? There's plenty of monetization in League of Legends, but you can be an incredibly successful. In fact, they pride themselves on the fact that you can be incredibly successful in that game without spending money as long as you're willing to spend time. And that trade-off between time and money is incredibly important. Perhaps will remain a market for paid, no microtransaction content. I just think in the scheme of the opportunity, as the quality of free-to-play games continues to get better, that you're going to see more and more free-to-play games that leverage microtransactions in some way. It does not mean that it is the amount of time you spend or your willingness to put effort into the game is going to be forgotten. Otherwise, gamers will demand it. I mean, that's what you see with League of Legends. You see an amazing game that is free-to-play, incredibly successful. I'd argue probably did more for the free-to-play market than any other game, at least in the West, that really focuses on the gaming experience. And you pay for it because it's valuable to pay for, not because it allows you to proceed.
And you're still going to see certain niche genres that I think are going to remain paid. I think the bigger genres, the bigger opportunities will certainly be free to play when you're talking about gaming. But when you start to talk about apps for preschoolers or educational apps or things like that, those markets can command a premium. And in fact, it could work against you if you go free to play because you're really clashing with what the expectation is. But for the most part, I think free to play is certainly not going to prohibit high quality content. And then also you have to remember that when you're talking about mobile and even PC or really any device now, content is competing against content. So games are now competing against movies, music, all consumed on the same device. So that's going to really, I mean, that really distributes the experience that people are looking to get. So you can get you can get your story experience on your phone by watching a movie, and you can get your game experience by playing a free-to-play game. So collectively, you've gotten your entire entertainment experience from multiple ways, whereas in the past, you would get story and gameplay from a high quality or high paid game because it was coming through just your console box, right? So.
I used to be very excited back in the early 90s when a television commercial would come on for a video game, because you just didn't see video game commercials on TV. And obviously it kind of exploded. You can't drive a block in Los Angeles or New York and see a Grand Theft Auto ad or a Call of Duty ad in the middle of Monday Night Football. It's big money being spent on marketing. When you talk about digital games, and especially these free-play games, the marketing proposition is a lot different, and you can't just spend your way to recognition. So what are some of the creative ways that you are forced to begin marketing your titles in a world where there's a million apps in the App Store, and if you're not in that list of the top 10, no one even knows you exist. You can have the greatest game in the world, but nobody knows you exist. It's very fragmented. So how has marketing changed, and how will we be marketed to for the future of games?
I mean, I'm sure everyone has a slightly different take on this, but for us, we would never do sort of general market television or newspaper or any type of traditional ads. It just doesn't make sense for us at all. There's so much information out there right now about users, about specific criteria about users, what games they're playing. I mean, if someone's on Facebook, for instance, and a lot of our games are on Facebook or are Facebook connected, we can target very, very specifically subsegments of users. So people in this territory, of this age, of this gender, who've played these other games. And generally, I mean, marketing is a huge part of our business because we'll, let's say, test 100 different subsegments. There will be 4 that work. And by work, I mean people in those subsegments retained well. Ultimately, we're willing to put money into the game, and we're some of our best customers. And we'll invest in those subsegments, ramp them up, do sort of some different takes on those subsegments. And then while those sort of go from experimental to sort of continuing to run on an ongoing basis, we'll run another 100. So I wouldn't call it a farm necessarily, but it's a process where we're constantly refining and trying to find the best users. And we could never make it if we were just doing broad, dumb buys. Like that just, it would never work for us.
By the way, you can't spend your way to success. I mean, you have to remember that you are dealing in some way, shape, or form, whether people want to admit it, with a retail platform when you're thinking about the iTunes Store or you're thinking about the Android Marketplace. Now there's different ways of approaching that, but there, the likelihood that, Candy Crush probably doesn't have to spend any money or hasn't spent any money in the past 6 months to market its product. We only spent $65,000, on the release process for Draw Something. We got 70 million installs before we spent another dime. The reality, though, is when we did release the game, we did cross-promotional. We did, we bought for a surge on the App Store so we could get ranked. We looked at the algorithms. We looked at our reviews. And there is a whole process to his point. There's an extremely intricate and analytical and arbitrage-based model around what you can afford spending, what your K factor is, what your exposure virality is on the store, how many users you buy, how many they get you, what's the social component in your game that drives more users. And so, marketing actually is much more complex today in the gaming industry than it's ever been, because, it is not about branding. It's really about, targeting an audience. Facebook is obviously doing a tremendous job today in the mobile industry in being able to drive targeted traffic based on all their information against their user base. But it is an intricate, just like advertisement on mobile has become very intricate and requires, a certain level of knowledge and expertise, so has marketing on mobile to be able to understand when to spend, how much to spend, what your arbitrage is, what your virality factors are, and ultimately do that profitably. But in in the early days, at least 2 years ago, yes, you could absolutely spend your way up to being number one. People, they were farming, there were bots, there were entire farming categories in China, which nobody wants to talk about, but they had guys in China installing the game, thousands of millions of people doing that for you, and you could pay at a discount $30,000 and ensure that you're going to be in the top 5. I mean, the industry doesn't want to talk about these things, but it is the fact. Like if you see a game that's number one and it's got 10 reviews, they're cheating their way up to the top of the food chain. I mean, that's but the reality is, hey, I spent $38,000 in 3 days, and now I'm number one. I've got the exposure and the potential to get up to 100,000 installs a day, 200,000 installs a day, wherever that may be, of being number one gets you because of the exposure factor and the intrinsic notion that if you're number one in the App Store, as a consumer, you look at it saying that must be a good game, and everybody installs it. And so you kind of look at your arbitrage saying, hey, I'm buying fake installs to get real consumers. Now they took down that system. The algorithms have changed. Reviews are much more important. Your latest reviews have huge influence on where you are ranked. And if you've got 20 great reviews and 2 bad ones recently, that update of the algorithm will take you down the App Store. You still because of the farming, you used to have to spend a lot of money to get into the top 25. Now you spend a lot less money. You need to spend a lot less, but the cost of acquisition is higher and it's harder to get up there. And ultimately, it's not about spending; it's still about the quality of the product. You can spend 100 grand to get up to the top 25. You won't stay there more than 48 hours if you don't have a good game, right? Because it's still about the notion of you have to retain users. Users have to be viral. There's no more powerful form of virality in marketing and branding than your consumers, and so you still have to deliver great products that have great retention, and your entire arbitrage model in marketing is against your retention model. If you're not retaining users, there's no probability of you having a lifetime value or a game that has a life cycle where you're going to make any money or that you can spend against. So you're really trying to understand your first day retention, your 7-day, your 30 days, and then how do you spend against that over time to have a life cycle that isn't a 3-month cycle, but a 1-year cycle. And if you look out there, it's hard to find games that have been around for more than a year and is still ranked high or still have 500,000 or 1 million DAUs out there on a daily basis.
Just when we got over farming for fake gold, we had farming for the top of the App Store. I had never heard that. It makes sense though because it is such.
They cracked down on that. I just want to be clear. That was in the early days. Apple shut that down.
Yeah, that's gone away. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now they found other ways to make those things happen. But that's the wonderful part about our industry is that technologies, new platforms, whatever, it creates a lot of innovation, stimulates a lot of creativity, and you have gold farming environments for people to drive up in-app currency purchases in Asia because currency purchasing and rate of spend in apps also had impact on the algorithms of the app stores, and so people would get farming. What they would do is this is going to be great. They would basically pay people with iTunes credit to go farm in the games to create stimulation of currency that would then allow you to go top ranking in the paying apps. And so there's there's farming in the World of Warcraft. I mean, there's our industry is full of very passionate core people who will do whatever it takes to get ahead in a game or get ahead in our industry.
Back when I first came out here, this is probably 2000, we met a guy who was trying to figure out a guest to have on a show, and he would go into a text-based adventure game and play, but he was a banker and he didn't have a lot of time, and he would meet up with a character in the game, and to buy an item, he would send a check for $25,000 by Federal Express to this player in the game in order to get this sword, so that when he had that 1 hour to play, he was all-powerful. So it's been around forever. It's not going to go away. It does lead to the question, how important is the platform, the gatekeeper? You talked about not having to pay the license fee like you used to have to do with Nintendo and so forth. But how important is it to have Apple and Google with the Android, and of course now we have Steam getting into the development or the gateway to gaming? How important is it for those partners to listen to what you as publishers and developers need, and how important is it to keep a level playing field?
I'm going to say one controversial thing. Apple doesn't listen to anybody.
They don't have to, right?
Well, I think the key there, though, is to remember that the Apple, particularly Apple, God bless them, but they are all about the consumer. That's who they care about. And the content creators are really secondary to the consumer experience. So with your brick and mortar model, the retailers were really beholden to the content creators. You could go in and you could buy your way to shelf space, buy your way to placement. You can't really do that on the App Store. And for better or worse, it really does protect the consumer, and it theoretically allows for a better consumer experience.
But the whole idea behind, Microsoft has achievements and Sony's got trophies and Apple's now adding achievements. How important is that to a developer and a publisher so that there is this kind of embracing of your title in the grand scheme of the overall platform so that you're not kind of on an island in the device? Does it matter?
I mean, every game we produce, we actually have a technology where everything goes multi-platform. So it's sort of the opposite of what you're saying. We don't want to be tied to any one platform. So all of our games have a shared backend. You can, access the game from your iPhone, then, shut your iPhone, go on Facebook, go on your iPad at home, go on your Kindle, whatever. We want you to be able to access from any platform, from any device, and not have to think about the platform provider. Like, we want to take that out of your hands and deal with it for you. So from our perspective, we want to diversify the risk a little bit because we actually feel like from year to year, right now, Apple holds a lot of cards. I completely agree. But 5 years from now, that may not be the case. And so the more we can diversify and serve users across multiple platforms, that's what we want. And then in terms of getting, special treatment, I mean, it is important to have a relationship with the Facebooks and the Apples and the Amazons of the world. But it doesn't make or break a game. At the end of the day, what they'll give you is some promotion for a week or a featured game, which is very nice to get, and it'll give you some free users at the start, which maybe can give you a little momentum. But if you don't have a successful game, it does not matter at all. And I think spending too much time courting the developers rather than just building it so it works well on the different platforms is the right approach. But everyone probably has a different take on it.
The question is, it may not break a game. Can it make a game? It can make a good game more noticeable. And so I think part of the question you're asking a little bit is, does the platform matter to developers? I think what you're going to hear from developers and publishers is what you just heard, which is not really. But I'd argue it does matter because it matters to the consumer. So look at the difference between Apple and Google stores today and where people make money. And the big difference is the Apple store is a great user experience. And so people not only use the device, there's more Android devices out there. They use the store in a way that they don't use the Android store for entertainment today. I'm not saying that's not going to change, but today, and a big part of it is that store is an easier place to search, find, and engage with content. Okay? Why did was Microsoft more successful than PS3? Part of that is the content that was available on the systems exclusively, but part of that is Xbox Live was a much better experience for the user. So given a choice between playing Call of Duty on Xbox or playing Call of Duty on Xbox 360 and playing it on PS3, people overwhelmingly chose to play it on Xbox 360 because the multiplayer experience was substantially better. So it may not matter to developers, and quite frankly, I suspect most developers would like Apple not to be as powerful in the mobile world as they are, but it matters to consumers how they interact with the content that's available to them.
Does the technology leap, now that we're at kind of a base level with these casual games and they're not as high fidelity, do you look at things like augmented reality and sensor-based gaming? Do you believe that we'll see that as kind of the next level, or do you think we'll see a plateauing in terms of the technology on these devices? Any thoughts on what the next big thing might be?
I mean, I do think, it's a little bit like when Apple comes out with a new iPad today, right? It's like, oh, my chip is so much more powerful, but is my consumer in need of such a more powerful chip, right? So there's always a delay in adoption of higher end technology on a mass scale, right? Which is ultimately what you need to make money profitably against whatever product or business you're in. It was the same now. I mean, the PlayStations, when PlayStation 2 came out, it had the Blu-ray, it had all these things, and people were like, I just want to play games, right? The people want, the gamers and people want to be entertained. They just want to be entertained. They don't want to have to think about what types of technologies they're using to be entertained. Now, do I think that, there's always just a ceiling or a level of technology being delivered to the market, even the next generation of console that consumers don't think about and don't care about? Yeah, they actually ultimately care about the experience and the usability and the entertainment factor. Do I think that things like, motion-based gaming, we saw Nintendo Wii was very popular. Now their next gen of what they delivered thereafter was not so popular. But Dance Dance Revolution was a lot of fun. and Guitar Hero is awesome. And so I do think that devices and interactivity and augmented reality in certain areas, for example, if you're playing a first-person shooter game, I'm an advisor to a company that competes with one of the augmented reality 3D visual devices, and they did military-based training simulation games to train the military, Wi-Fi based, and yeah, do I think that you could play a first-person shooter game or a sports game in your living room and be fully immersed into the experience and have people pay for that over time at a price point that makes sense? Absolutely. Does that apply to all genres of games out there? Absolutely not, right? But the fact is, Americans love their guns, and if you could have the notion of holding a real gun and shooting at something while you're holding your 3D glasses and you're completely immersed in your product, people will pay for that.
I'll tell you that I recently there was a company that was selling a gun that had a gyroscope and you could play it with first-person shooters, and I was like, I want to review this. I love shooter games. I want to get this thing, so they sent it to me, and I got it. It was this fantastic, amazing, realistic weapon. But it gets exhausting. Do you really want to do this? I could sit on my couch and play for hours, or I could spend 5 minutes like this, and then I'm exhausted and I want to put it down. So I got rid of it. It wasn't worth it. So I think as much as it's great to have this new technology, if it exhausts the player, if it's not fun, then it doesn't really matter.
You gotta work out, Scott. What's going on?
So let's take a chance to open it up. I'm sure people might have questions. So we have a microphone out there, and people can ask anybody anything. Yes?
So what sorts of things are you looking at to improve the retention formula for the process?
One more time?
Retention.
Yeah.
How are you doing to that?
What things are you thinking of adding to the games, not as an essential feature of the game, but as an ancillary feature which might be cross-platform to improve the retention that you experience on your games?
I'll throw out a few. There's probably a really long list from everyone here, but for us, the biggest drivers are people playing with their friends. And if their friends are in the game and there's a positive interaction between them, meaning they can help each other or they can compete with each other, retention is going to double or triple. And if they don't have friends in the game, there's a tendency for them to roll off. So friendships in the game is number one. Number two, they should have a profile that has the opportunity to continue to sort of build on and improve over time. So if I'm coming in and playing a game and I'm getting a score, going away, and then starting from scratch again when I return, that game is not going to have as high a retention profile as another game where I'm leveling up and I'm a higher level player and I can show off, and now I have additional powers, and now I have access to different content, and I'm getting farther and farther, and I feel like as a person I'm progressing within the game. That's what gets people to come back again. And then the last thing is it just has to be really intuitive. Like, it shouldn't be hard to figure out. They should be able to figure out really quickly, but then have enough depth so they feel like they're constantly learning something new. Those are our three biggest drivers.
I mean, it really varies per game. I mean, you could have leaderboards, you could have badges, you could have, you have to have a CRM, notion to your game and how you push notification to people of new content or new items, content releases, item releases, brand integrations, sponsoring virtual currency through third parties. There's monetization, platforms out there to help re-engage people, giving stuff away for free. I mean, there's just a slew of things, but that really varies per game type, and having friends to play with. I mean, there's plenty of single player games out there that have a million other things to retain people as well. Leveling curves. Candy Crush is all about the difficulty levels, but there's also games that just have pure leveling curves and storylines. At some point, you're at the end of the game. I think that was probably, in some ways, one of the shortcomings to some of the Zynga's games. That they'd have a story end per se. Like, at some point, you got nowhere more than you needed to go. But there's just a slew of things that you could be doing. It just really depends to whether or not it makes sense within the game plan, the game designs of what the experience is meant to be.
And for us at DreamWorks Animation, we create great characters, and the characters are an awesome way for us to extend the game experience. Our Turbo Racing League app that we launched earlier this summer ahead of our film, we're at 30 million downloads now. It's still going strong. We have yet to release a character from the film. So we've been going for 5 months now with that game, and we're going to release the first character from the film in conjunction with our home entertainment launch as a way to draw people back in because they love the characters. It's a whole new, fresh way to keep sort of extending that experience. So I think, it really depends. There's a lot of different ways. I think a lot of it depends on the expertise of the developer or the company that's created the content. And some are very good at social gameplay, some are good at character development, and leaning into what your expertise is what's going to extend that experience for your players.
Yeah, they're all very powerful. I remember the first time I started playing that Mafia Wars game, and you think it's just a few minutes here and there, and the next thing you know, every hour you're checking, and you're inviting people you don't even know to become part of your game. And, really, I think the social aspect is very, very key in extending the time. Sure, we got a microphone right over here.
Hi. I wanted to ask, can you talk about some of the channels that you are looking to get news about the next innovative games, controllers, concepts? It could be a YouTube channel or a conference or anything. I'm just curious.
Are you just
how do
asking where we get the information of what's happening in the market?
Yeah, but like the most
Because we know each
innovative
other.
things.
No, I mean, realistically, the fact is, I did 5 startups. I have a network of entrepreneurs. It's like the PayPal mafia, right? I mean, the fact is, the gaming industry veterans have pretty much worked together at one company or another. Most entrepreneurs who are trying to build companies today are trying to poach guys from Zynga or his company, and he's poaching guys from other companies. It's a whirlwind of switching chairs and going from one company to the next. The DNA Gree CEO just left. People thought he got fired. He's actually now CEO of Zynga. Zynga hired a bunch of EA guys. EA guys hired a bunch of Zynga guys. And it's a small industry, even though it's a huge market and it's billions of dollars. The fact is, because we attend events, because we speak, because there's a fluidity of transparency of information in this industry that is like no other industry. I mean, you sign an NDA, that means nothing in the game industry, okay? Nothing at all. If you work in China, they'll sign NDAs like, rain the candy, like nobody cares. So the fact is, there's a passion within the industry for people to support other people in the industry. There's a legacy of people working in the industry that love what we do and that work at building the industry over time. And the best place to know what's happening is actually to continuously interact with people within.
Hi. What do you think about education in gaming, where education is going with gaming? Like, for example, Brent Bushnell is doing something with Steam Carnival. He's going around the world and talking about, teaching kids about science and math. Where do you think that's going?
I probably have the most controversial opinion on it. We're basically talking about is edutainment. Edutainment is not an industry has ever demonstrated there's a real business there. And I think part of the problem is if that it's really fun, it's probably not all that educational. And if it's really educational, it's not all that fun. And you kind of, most of the people, I've never seen a company that has walked that balance. Because if it's really education, then some adult has to push them using it. Okay, so by the time, I have kids, okay? By the time your kids are about 5, if what they want to play with, they want to play with. And so if it's play, it's play. And if it's educational and I want them to use it, then I really want it to work. So, I'm not saying an innovation can't come. I personally think edutainment is a really difficult business to run because for just that reason. You're never going to be as fun as the alternative thing that doesn't have to educate them. So it generally becomes education with gaming elements, not real entertainment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I mean, and then the monetizations models around 0 to 4, 4 to 8 and beyond, and Leapfrog. I mean, those guys have been public companies struggling forever to figure out how to grow or maintain market shares. I mean, I think the most interesting part of that market is the 4 and under. It's not because everything's entertainment to them, right? So and everything's educational, right? So if you've got kids, and a bunch of us, here are kind of new to kids. You give them a tablet, like anything that's on it is going to be, they start learning how to turn it on. I mean, kids from the age of 1 know how to turn on your phone already. Like it's, just dazzling. And so you just give them entertainment, and it is education. They don't know the difference between the two. But after a certain age group, they know TV, they know editorial, they know what their friends are doing, they know what a toy is, and they completely understand the difference between having to do homework, having to learn something versus having to be entertained. But I think the market 4 and under, which I don't even know if it's edutainment, it's really about, I would say, learning. Learning holistically about emotions, about, just counting, about anything that really helps the educational process of learning things as a whole, and that's psychology, really. That market is tremendous. It's being heavily invested into. It's very hard to quantify how impactful it really is. I personally don't want my kid to watch TV or to be on a tablet at all, and maybe because that's him in the industry, but the fact is that's one market where if you build a brand, or and some have tried through licensing or whatever else, and it's more often than not failed because licensing is hard to deliver profitability against, but you can build trust with parents, but that you're selling to parents. You're not selling to kids anymore, right? Who's going to the iTunes store? I mean, yes, kids will go to the iTunes stores and spend thousands of dollars in their game on your credit card. But when you're dealing with 4 and under, you're really selling trust. And so now you're dealing with Elmo, you're dealing with all these little fun educational kind of things, and parents will pay for Elmo $2.99 app because somehow Elmo seems okay. I don't know how really educational Elmo is. I mean, Baby Einstein, huge lawsuit after a decade of building an empire, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, they were marketing this notion of education, and they were able to be sued, because it was never proven that it was actually educational at all. So it's really hard to make the claim that you are educational, but what you can do in certain market, segments is actually deliver certain types of value that people are willing to embrace and pay for.
So I have to provide a contrarian point of view here, which is, and this is a silly example, I'm sure, but I remember back in middle school, I took a semester of typing and didn't want to be there and didn't pay attention. And by the end, I kind of knew how to touch type, but not really. And then there was this silly floppy disk program, I'm dating myself, I put in where these little aliens came down and I typed them. And basically in a long weekend, I could type. And I feel like there's something about games and gamifying the educational experience that actually works in a big way. And I'm not saying we figured it out, and I don't know how the monetization model works, but I know I'm willing to pay. I have 2 kids. I'm willing to pay for great content for them. The definition of what great content is, it's up for debate. The question of how we should build and monetize these apps, up for debate. I think there's a huge opportunity here, though, and we're going to see it really blossom over the next 10 years. That's my take on it.
And I'll give you the mic. I think one market actually that's really interesting and very powerful in the edu-gaming environment is for children with some form of mental illness, whatever that may be, including autism. And it's been proven actually that various types of gamified gaming application, including the ability for kids who have autism who can't communicate or don't know how to or can't figure out how to use technology and games to be able to then translate emotions into language. And if you've seen a few things on TV about those things happening and the parents and the influence and the impact it has to hear their kids tell them through a format of a game, and the game then saying to their parents, "I love you," and the power that has. I think that's a very interesting segment for a certain category.
And I think education games or edutainment has suffered a little bit because a lot of people are just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. They're trying to take what is traditional education and fit it into a game, instead of maybe looking at, are there other types of ways or things that you can educate kids about through gaming? Socialization, sharing, sort of group activities, those types of things which aren't your traditional reading, arithmetic, that I'm not sure how good that fits into edutainment. And then there's also just the fact of, if you look a little bit older, to adults in education or even teenagers, if you get a little bit older and you now have somebody who wants to learn, but they're looking for a more entertaining way to learn, I think that has more potential necessarily than trying to gamify arithmetic for a 6-year-old. Right.
So the important part of what pretty much everybody just said is that if it is education, whatever form of education it is, with gaming elements, it's not gaming that helps you learn, right? Because if it's a game, you're never going to build as good a game as just a game. You're just not. But if it's education that is more fun, I'll describe it as good medicine. If it's good medicine, that's a big win, right? But then you're selling, if it's for kids, you're essentially selling to the parent to get them to do it because the kid needs the education. You're not selling to the child as an alternative form of entertainment.
Interesting, the typing game, it made its way back. There was a game called Typing of the Dead, where you would have to type in a letter to shoot and kill a zombie. So I don't know that that's good, but typing is still a good
All I know is
game.
it works.
Yeah,
it works.
Okay, time for a couple more questions in the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion, if there is one at all, about what role streaming services like Twitch play, or whether there's any analytics run on, that sort of data. How many viewers different games are commanding on the streams, or if that's just limited to a very specific PC market segment.
So I'm a big fan of Twitch. I was one of the founders of Curse.com, which is one of the largest MMORPG destinations for add-ons and widgets and forums and databases. I mean, I think what Twitch delivers is entertainment. It's real-time live gameplay. Nobody thought that people would care to watch games being played live or streamed. But if you look at YouTube, actually, there's some of the top-ranked YouTube channels now are guys who are playing games, recording themselves, being total asses, and people find that very entertaining. But if you've ever been in the World of Warcraft and you've played in a guild, it is insane, right? And the level of passion and engagement and drama that goes on between managing a guild of 100 people, and I've never played World of Warcraft, but I built a company around it, and it was extremely, I capitalize on people's, issues. But if you were around that, and you see the level of passion, I mean, these guys are engineers, they're coders, they're overriding the system, they're building hacks, they're recording themselves, and you've got, audio, and you've got all these things going on. I mean, I think those are very powerful. And, when you capture data around that, you are capturing, information that advertisers or marketers or game design, really care about. I mean, I think a lot of the supporting industry to the gaming industry, whether it's forums, whether it was editorial, whether it's Twitch, is meant to amplify and expand the experience of gameplay. And we built Curse around this notion that 90% of people never finish an MMO. And so what tools could you give them for them to be able to understand where to go, where to find swords, spells, this, that, whatever, and building, inspiring games to build databases, which are really much yellow pages of, real-time multiplayer games. I mean, Twitch is, just live stream play. I mean, what can come of that, and I don't know exactly, but for sure, all the deals that they're doing is a reflection of the fact that people want to be entertained outside of the spheres of the gameplay itself. And that, if you think about Line and Kakao in Asia, which are gaming companies who build communication tools around gameplay, and now people have social networks around mobile games, and they're billion-dollar businesses. And they're growing faster than other segments of the industry. So I think that, the innovation, the amazing part about our industry is the innovation that goes on around gaming, not just the development of games.
Well, a lot of great insight. Thank you all. Appreciate your comments. There's a lot of great stuff here tonight, and coffee is still available, right? So enjoy, and we'll see you.
Really quick. Sorry, folks. Really quick. Thank you all, and one more round of applause for the panel here. It's such an amazing talk and great insights, as Scott said. Well, before we let you all go and you guys get your tacos and some more drinks, I want to bring up Adam Chapnick, who is from Indiegogo.
And just to add one more thing, just so everybody knows, so Adam in a second, but food truck's going to stop at 10, but you got to sit tight, and then we're going to give away like $6,000 plus of stuff. We've got phones, hard drives, wireless speakers, high-end headphones, so you have to stick around to almost 11. So don't go anywhere, in other words. Yes.
I love it. So, hi, woo, hello! How you doing? Congratulations to Kristen and Efren and all the team from Reach for an amazing first edition of this. May it live 1,000 years. And it was an amazing panel. I mean, one of the best panels I have been privileged to watch, and I see too many. Seriously, it was awesome. So we at Indiegogo are very proud to be a part of the the whole shebang. How many people have never heard of Indiegogo? Okay, one person. Talk to me later. And that's great. No, I appreciate your candor. How many people pretended they've heard of it? Thank you. I appreciate your candor, sir, and you, the three of us, four of us. We'll talk later. Very quickly, something we didn't touch on too much tonight is in the event that are there any independent game developers here tonight? Okay, we'll just say everyone. And Indiegogo is a great option for funding anything that you do, whether it's your mother's cancer treatments or your broken teeth, or your gameplay, or your farm in China for getting your game ranked, or your typing floppy disk game. We do it all. It's a way that you can engage your customers in the process of making whatever it is that you do, and in the process of engaging them, transferring them from casually interested into maniacally, rabidly evangelical. They actually give you money that helps you make your thing, and when you go to market, you have a rabid word-of-mouth marketing team that works for you to promote your new game, and they've paid you for the right to do it. And how much equity do you give them? Hold on, carry the force. None! Sound good? Okay, if you want to know more, just talk to me, because I've decided that we will sponsor the bar, and we will now open it for business, and let's do that mixer. Yeah! Thanks for being here.